Cathedral by Raymond Carver. Raymond Carver lived from 1938 to 1988. He lived in the Pacific Northwest area and was successful as a writer and professor during his lifetime. Carver's stories mainly take place in his native Pacific Northwest region. They are people with the type of lower middle-class characters the author was familiar with growing up. He got married at age 18 to his 16-year-old girlfriend, Marianne, he'd gotten pregnant. By age 21, he had 2 kids. Like his characters, Carver and his wife at the time worked at a series of low-paying jobs. He picked tulips, pumped gas, swept hospital corridors, swabbed toilets, and managed an apartment complex, according to a New York Times Magazine profile. He also, like his father, worked in sawmills, as a delivery man, as a stockroom boy, and in gas stations. His wife waited tables, worked for the phone company, and sold books door to door. By his 30s, he was a severe alcoholic, including hospitalizations and near-death experiences. He and Marianne were somewhat poor and worked hard to get by. They fought terribly and were eventually divorced in 1982. But from 1979 on, he had been living with a woman named Tess, who he married right before his death. Kurt Nesset wrote in the Stories of Raymond Carver that Carver was focused on the issue of love and its absence, and the bearing of love's absence on marriage and individual identity. Carver's prose is often muted, even anticlimactic, but the atmosphere is tense. His stories often involve very little action within their plot. Instead, the focus is much more on the dialogue and investigation of a theme. Carver became one of the leading figures among so-called dirty realists for their gritty depictions of everyday life. In Why Don't You Dance, a man whose marriage has failed sells his furniture in his front yard. A young couple shows some interest in them and dance together in the driveway at the man's suggestion. The surfaces of Carver's stories look calm and banal, but especially his portrayals of marriage problems are full of emotional tension, hidden memories, wounds, longing, hate, anxiety, and melancholy. After the publication of his first collection, Carver's writing evolved, characterized by a paring down of his prose. This resulted in the hard-edged, detached minimalist style of his prose, State's Charters, as found in his second collection. By the time he published his third collection, Cathedral, which includes our story, and then his last collection, he had developed a more expansive style. Still, his writing is associated with the style called minimalism. Minimalism, or minimalist fiction, is a kind of realistic fiction often associated with contemporary authors such as Carver and Hemingway, but also other American writers like Ann Beatty and Bobby Ann Mason. Its style is generally flat or unemotional and unadorned. It relies much on dramatic action, scene, and dialogue. It does not make use of complex narration or authorial summary. Facts are drawn from ordinary life, often in great, if bare, detail. According to New York Times book review critic Irving Howe, Carver's stories evoke strong American literary traditions. Formally, they summon remembrances of Hemingway and perhaps Stephen Crane, masters of tightly packed fiction. In subject matter, they draw upon the American voice of loneliness and stoicism. Carver's characters, like those of many earlier American writers, lack a vocabulary that can release their feelings, so they must express themselves mainly through obscure gesture and berserk display. According to Paul Gray of Time, something in their lives denies them a sense of community. They feel this lack intensely, yet are too wary of intimacy to touch other people, even with language. Thus is the case with the main character in Cathedral. Friendless and wary of his houseguest, he has issues communicating and relating to others. We learn about him through his first-person point-of-view narration and his tone. His thoughts and comments reveal much about his personality and attitude toward the other characters, their experiences, and his own experience. The unnamed wife differs greatly from Bub, the main character. She's gracious, sociable, helps others, and writes poetry, which means she's expressive and creative. The blind man, Robert, is also friendly. He's gregarious, has a sense of humor, and is open to new experiences.